All right. Well, we are recording. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today and for celebrating with us the Native American Heritage Month. I want to make sure I said that correctly because there's a few different names for this month. I've seen National American History Month and all that. So we want to make sure we're we're right with the name here. And so today we have a fireside chat with Dr. George Vigil. Did I pronounce it correctly? Awesome.
Yes.
So let me go ahead and introduce him. Dr. George Vigil is an experienced professional with over 19 years of experience in several industries. He's a professor of business communications and management, marketing communications, organizational leadership, strategy and competitive intelligence and sustainability with a focus on strategic communication at Austin Peay State University, California Baptist University, Holy Names University, Pacific Oaks College, University of Redlands, University of Arizona, University of Riverside, and the University of the People. That's amazing. Dr. Vigil has received numerous awards, including the University of Redlands Mentor Award for his mentoring excellence in serving international MBA students. He has also served in several senior leadership roles at Fortune 100 organizations and has participated in several international academic conferences and competitions throughout the globe. Dr. Vigil has achieved a Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership from Pepperdine University, a Master of Science in Strategic Communications from Purdue University, a Graduate Certificate in Strategic Communication Management from Purdue University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Telecommunications from California State University, Fullerton. Currently, Dr. Vigil is a Ph.D. candidate in the Ph.D. program here at Pepperdine in the Global Leadership and Change program at Pepperdine University. So please help me welcome Dr. Vigil.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. All right, let me go ahead and spotlight you and we will go ahead and get started.
Awesome.
If I can figure it out. Here we go. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So let me begin doing that. No, actually, we're done. All right, so thank you for selecting me to be able to speak during Native American Heritage Month. It is not only an honor, but it is a pleasure. Today we'll be going over my cultural identity, my positionality in the world, and we'll open it up for some Q&A. So before we begin, I really wanted to provide some baseline of what I currently think every day. So finally, we continue to contribute to our national Indigenous movement from our thinking and feeling and act as Indigenous from the worldview that we inherited spiritually from our ancestors. So as we move into understanding my cultural identity, first I wanted to start with discussing my ancestral lineage. On my grandfather's side, we do have a lineage to the Jicarilla Apache Nation, in addition to the Pueblo of Cochiti, which is in between Santa Fe, New Mexico and Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is actually the Pueblo back in the late 1800s. As I was looking through all of my ancestry, I do have a blood quantum of 25% indigenous. And as a result of that, I was really interested over these past 5 years in really researching who I am and where my family came from. So this little blue marker right here is indicating my great-great-great-grandma, Manuela Montoya, who is listed here as an Indian, which is very unique because as we researched more and more of our family, we identified that at a certain point, the Indian listing from the census was actually then turned over to white. And the reason why that occurred was mainly because during that time, there were certain laws that prevented them from actually sustaining where they were living in terms of their house. And as they continued, for the most part, there were some laws that stated that you could only purchase from your counterparts, specifically from the government. So it was really interesting to see that had changed. But prior to that, we found this, and this is actually from 1887. So as I want to first call out why I do what I do. So my grandfather, Arthur Valentin Vigil, inspired me just really to serve Indigenous nations. My grandfather was proud of his heritage of not only being Indigenous American, but also serving in the United States of America. So today I selected to speak specifically because one, I wanted to memorialize his contributed efforts, not only to the community, but to my family and to our nation. And as a result of him actually being my grandfather, I was able to learn the rights and wrongs of everything in being a minority. And so as we move forward, where did my leadership journey begin? I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, and this route was very challenging, but it helped me really to understand how to survive. Mainly just because of the dynamics, whether they be the social inequalities, all the way through just living in poverty. And as a result of that, I really wanted to move forward past beyond what I found was a confinement in the area that I had grown up with. And my grandma would always tell me to be the rose that blossoms from the curb, especially just because of the fact that she knew the route that I was going to take outside of the neighborhood was actually going to be a very long journey and a very difficult one. This picture that I listed here with me actually tying a tie on one of my counterparts, he actually, in essence, didn't grow up with a father such as myself. And I remember I had went to the library. I took the bus, went out to the library and learned how to tie a tie, because back then we didn't have Google, we didn't have smartphones. So I had to be a little old school and actually take the bus ride, because I knew that we were about to graduate from 8th grade. So this is actually me helping him tie his tie, because he didn't have any family members there during his graduation. So I realized at a certain point I needed to be that change for people. So one of the reasons why I ended up going to college was because of the fact that I identified for my own family that I wanted to break through this, I would call it more of a generational limitation, that everyone in my family were laborers that didn't really seek a college education, that at 18 the expectation was that you were going to contribute to the household by working. And so as a result of me living with my grandparents, I decided that I wanted to start off by going to community college. So I started at Cerritos College, then moved on to Cal State Fullerton. Then after many years of working, I decided to go to Pepperdine to receive a Doctor of Education in Organizational Leadership. Before that, I actually then went to Purdue, as I had mentioned. And then recently I graduated with a certificate in tribal administration from Claremont Graduate University. I was selected amongst many of the participants that were looking to understand how to protect tribal sovereignty, how to, in essence, really protect just this cultural sovereignty all the way through data sovereignty as well. Within this tribal administration program, we were able to not only have conversations with various tribal leaders, we were, in essence, really informed how the current state of Indian Nation is really looked at, what's actually going on. And we actually had very deep conversations to figure out what we can do in order to be able to transform Indian country. And as a direct result of this actual program, I decided to focus on my Ph.D. dissertation topic, which is really focusing on building knowledge infrastructure for sovereign nations. So where have I worked? That's a good question. Is as she had listed that in essence really started first at Fox News. I used to write the little ticker at the bottom of the screen. Just a funny little story. I remember one time I didn't hit enter. I wrote it out, but I didn't hit enter. And then I remember the news editor was coming in saying, "Hey, you need to make sure you send it through." And as a result of that, learned that there's so many different facets of this industry that I was really curious. I then went to work for the Dr. Phil show as a production assistant. And as I navigated through all of these industries, one of the main questions that I always receive is, why did you go and have so many jobs? And it's mainly because I wanted to understand what I was capable of, not only as an individual, but as a professional, but I really wanted to learn in real time a skill set that would empower me to empower others. So early on, I knew that eventually I would like to be a professor and I would like to go to obtain a doctorate. And so as a direct result of all these jobs, I've learned so much that now in my current role, I'm able to utilize everything from designing not only curriculum through designing flyers, but really just even knowing how to protect brands, how to be able to leverage specific knowledge to be able to help move and advance the current nation that I am supporting. And with that, as wanted just to kind of briefly explain that I really identified with working for a sovereign nation because of my grandfather. I remember the conversation that I had right before he had passed. I said that I was looking for an opportunity, and he said, "It's going to come. You just have to make sure that you're open to it and don't leave it where it lies. Make sure that you always chase those opportunities." So while I was working at the University of Redlands as a business adjunct faculty member, one of my students actually was in human resources, and she said, "I really like your teaching style. I think that you would be a good fit. We currently have a learning and development manager position, and you will be in charge of not only seeing and realizing the impact that you will have specifically on the tribe, but you'll see how you can influence and really impact the greater community through its employees." And so I initially applied, didn't tell her that I applied, because I didn't necessarily want to have a bias. And so I went through all of the entire, it was about 3 interviews. And then they had asked at that time, right after the interview, "How did you hear about this role?" And I had mentioned that I was teaching a business course, and one of the recruiters was actually in my class. And so as a direct result, I now work with my student very closely because we both work in HR. So who do I serve? Currently, I serve the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians as the Learning and Development Department Manager. And in my role, I really oversee the building of courses, manage a team of graduate level instructional designers and learning and development specialists. Currently, right now, we have a little under 10,000 employees specifically that are growing because of just the dynamics of the industry. We go up to 10,000, we go down and kind of fluctuate because it is a hospitality industry. So within my current role, everything that comes through my intake requests can range from leadership courses that specifically focus on difficult conversations that managers have with their employees, everything ranging from how to even properly look at leaves of absence for employees, especially just with us being in this pandemic still. It's interesting to see that we are having to inform them on that. So as a result of that, I also work directly with not only the departments, but senior leadership. So I actually report to the it would be the head of HR, the senior vice president. And within this change, I've been able to really understand how we influence the demand that's needed, and especially just having so many new employees. So typically on a Wednesday, we currently have everything ranging between just say 50 to about 200 employees that we are actually onboarding and actually bringing on to San Manuel. So as a perfect example, we currently are developing a leadership series that are specifically focusing on how to think like a leader. So it is 5 modules, and within those 5 modules that take about approximately 3 hours each, we just really infer the different types of leadership styles. We actually have activities that allow them to be able to have like a business simulation to be able to understand in real time what's going on with that. And it's very, I would say, promising and also very hopeful that as we continue to grow, that we are going to be able to develop a core set of courses that are specifically tied to the business needs within what we call as the enterprise. So one of the questions that I was asked is, how do I celebrate Native American Heritage Month? I actually participate in several powwows. I make sure that my wife and I actually do visit the different powwows throughout the area in preparation for Native American Heritage Month. I do participate in prayer ceremonies at Purdue University. We specifically have a little prayer group where we go play native drums and sing native songs and be able to then have some sage in the air to be able to help purify our spiritualities, but also just to make sure that we're cleansing our mind, body, and soul of any negative impurities. And with that, I can't leave out, I like to make fry bread at home. So I got my grandfather's recipe that he has, provided of how to make it. My grandma tweaked it a little bit to make sure. It's the one thing that I currently do enjoy eating during this month, because it reminds me of the times that I was with my grandparents and how we were always making sure that we were focusing on how to recognize our ancestral roots. So within my research, I currently am focusing on generational advancement of sovereign nations, and really just focusing on developing a qualitative study of understanding the significance of knowledge infrastructure. And so really identifying what can we do in order to protect political sovereignty in the event that it is removed by the federal government. What can nations do in order to be able to sustain themselves for future generations? So I'm currently a part of several projects where we are looking long-term, not short-term, of how to be able to advance nations, specifically with where I'm employed, but how do we also impact neighboring nations to be able to help protect them from the removal of any political sovereignty that may occur. Hopefully it never does, but as a direct result, my study interviewed not only tribal citizens, community members, and actual employees that have worked or currently work for sovereign nations, to really understand what is needed in order to make sure that there's a knowledge infrastructure that protects their indigenous knowledge, their traditional knowledge, their contemporaneous knowledge, and then also moving forward just to make sure that they don't lose sight of their cultural sovereignty as well. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm going to go to the next slide really quick, because this is a way for you and I to connect. This is my LinkedIn profile, so if you guys want to take a snapshot of that, or if not, I can put the link in the vial. So I'll leave that up for a couple of seconds, and then after I will open it up for questions.
All right, thank you so much.
Of course.
Yeah, wonderful. So we're going to open up to everybody. Please feel free to send over your questions, your comments. This is a very nice and casual conversation. So Dr. Miramontes.
Hi, George. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you for joining us. It's such a pleasure to hear you. Obviously, you and I have talked a little bit before, but not much. And I'm fascinated by your topic. So I'm curious, and this question is rooted in my own ignorance, so hopefully you can help me here a little bit. Indigenous cultures or Native American communities tend to have a really strong oral tradition. In your research, have you found any way of bridging that oral because oral tradition is so important. We see it in so many different communities, but that's also sometimes how we lose some of that knowledge, right? Because it changes, it morphs a little bit. Usually that's where dance and storytelling comes into play. But how do you maintain the strength of those stories? If there's any bridging or documentation, or is there any shift into finding different ways of really recording some of this crucial information?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So within my research, I found that many of the tribal citizens were looking to create either a cultural center, specifically that is maybe attached to their business enterprise, if they have a casino, for example, or if they are going to archive their not only songs that are really like in essence like their bird songs, but also the just the knowledge of how their specific tribes have existed and where they come from in terms of their philosophies, really just understanding even everything down to just even looking at the flowers that they specifically have during certain seasons. So they try to bring everyone together. Typically at San Manuel, they have a big house, which is in essence their cultural center where they meet. They also invite all of the tribal citizens to be able to help do that. But in terms of looking at my research, they specifically are really notating that archiving that is going to help prevent them from losing out on their I would say more so of their cultural identity, just because of the fact that once we lose that oral tradition, many of the stories, philosophies, and even just the different types of ceremonies are lost. And that's actually happened over several decades, where previously in the early 1900s, there were bounties out for Native Americans. And so they specifically were trying to wipe away the Native Americans in the United States, and then they were also then sent over to boarding schools, which were set up to wipe away the natives. So they would shave their head, they would specifically put them in clothes that were not native, and then they weren't allowed to speak their native languages. They were not even allowed to dance. They weren't allowed to do so many things. And so as a direct result of that, now there's been a shift where even specifically, even looking at San Manuel, Yamava is also tied to their Serrano language. They also have certain areas in the casino and throughout the hotel where they have certain naming, so that they could specifically identify to the public that this is our cultural heritage. But also what's really interesting, they just recently came out with a magazine that it also informs the public of their history, and specifically looking at Santos San Manuel, who San Manuel is named after.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the floor is open for more questions. Yes, Dr. Brame.
Yeah, so this is also fascinating, and it's so wonderful that we get to have you at Pepperdine. Lucky us, my goodness. I'm just curious, growing up, did you learn any of native language growing up?
Unfortunately, my grandfather limited everything to English. He actually experienced a lot of, I would say, a dissentment of who he was growing up in New Mexico. And so as a result of things that he would speak certain languages and he would get like rocks thrown at him, they would try to like beat him up, and they would, so as a direct result, he said, you know what, we're gonna keep this to where it's just going to only be English. But one of the main things that I really appreciated about New Mexican culture was my grandfather's family is actually from Santa Fe. And so they, every so often within growing up, we would always visit. So I was always embraced in the culture, always seeing just even the native artifacts, and really taking journeys to be able to identify for myself like where we came from and where we're headed. One of the main things that I also remember was going to the Nambe reservation, which is about almost about an hour to 2 hours, depending on traffic, by Santa Fe. And there is a small church called El Sanatorio de Chimayo. And it's a very, very spiritual place where individuals that have actually went in there, they have come out not needing their asthma inhaler, their crutches. They've, been ridden of all disease. And so the myths and also the stories, go back so far. But it was really neat to be able to visit that. So usually we tend to make that journey. Me and my grandma actually went on like a pilgrimage, I would call it. So we actually rocked at the beginning of the reservation all the way through to the church. And so it took us about 2 hours because we were just chatting, and my grandpa was in the car and kind of following us little by little because he wasn't able to walk that far. So we've been constantly going in to the different types of cultures, kind of like a big melting pot that is New Mexican culture. But typically we would always go to different reservations to be able to talk with people, to also be going out and providing food and certain rations as well.
Thank you. I'm wondering, I'd like to ask a really totally unacademic question. So it's been really actually kind of cool to see recently there's been more attention to Native American cultures in various ways in in our community, and like, for example, the Gene Autry Museum in Griffith Park had this amazing exhibit of art from Native American artists, activists, which was just incredible. And there's some really interesting programming on television and streaming services. And recently, my husband and I have watched a show called Reservation Dogs. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with that? Yeah, I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts about that, because it seems really thoughtful and interesting to me, but I'm an outsider and just really fascinated by this, and would love to hear if you have any thoughts about that.
Yes. And in comparison to Reservation Dogs, there is Yellowstone that also describes not only the political sovereignty, but also how specific operations are on reservations, because they are on a reservation. Just say, for example, there are certain legal requirements versus not having legal requirements outside of the reservation. So as they really kind of showcase what's in a comedic way of like what's going on the reservation. I do feel that sometimes dependent on who the production company is or the writers, they might be a bit misinformed dependent on so it's always good to see that they're actually now being in essence shown on national TV and being able to kind of focus on what's going on. Now, I would say also just in a day-to-day operation, just because when we look at even Yellowstone, the premise behind that is we have Kevin Costner's role is fighting against the it would be considered like the chair member, and he's one of the tribal leaders. So it's pretty interesting to see how even once in existing right now, it's going on in the world, that people are always trying to take away land, always trying to take away certain rights, specifically. So they're very protected on the reservation, and so they're trying to keep it that way to make sure that they're sheltering and really protecting future leaders within that. So I would say that I've seen the show, and then I don't have any distaste for it, but I would say that it's good because it also enlivens and actually brings forward what actually can be happening to natives.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have other questions?
George, you talked about tribal sovereignty and your research on how to strengthen it or make sure that it can't be taken away. Can you speak a little bit to that as to the I'm sure most of us have heard of tribal sovereignty, but if you can just speak a little bit more to what that is and what it entails and why you chose to do a study on this.
Oh, yes. So one of the reasons why I identified that I wanted to study this was while I was in the tribal administration certificate program, we were able to really identify through not only the readings, but also through our various guest speakers, what is actually going on in Indian country. And so tribal sovereignty allows the tribes to be able to function as their own government. So I currently work for the government of San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. So oftentimes when I say that I work for San Manuel, they do think that I work for just the casino, because they don't understand there's government operations behind that. So we have a connection to other, not only nations, but we also try to work with local and state and federal governments, just because of the fact that the tribal sovereignty allows them to be able to exist without really any laws on their land within the reservations, but it also provides them opportunities to be able to have enterprises such as casinos through tribal compacts that exist between the sovereign nation and the state of California, for example. They currently have contracts for those that are in California. So it allows them to be able to provide gaming operations to the public to be able to generate revenue. So San Manuel specifically started at a bingo hall, and as a result, once they were federally recognized, it allowed them to be able to start focusing on building out their reservation. So as they're building, they have a small area of reservation land, and it's very hilly, as I had mentioned that when you go on the actual reservation, oftentimes you lose reception because you're in the mountains. And so they were building cellular infrastructure to be able to help them connect not only with other nations, but also have the employees be able to then work with the tribal government relations, the philanthropy department. So when we look at tribal sovereignty, it's just a way for a sovereign nation to be able to have their own specific constitution. They have their own tribal court. They have everything that's necessary to exist on their reservation without any implications from any other laws that are specific to federal laws and state laws.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I actually have a question. What are the top 3 challenges that you currently might be seeing right now that Native Americans are currently going through?
So I do feel that one of the main things that I've seen, not only research, but even just in really kind of viewing everything, is that when we do have next generation leaders, many of them specifically need help with understanding how to manage their money, making sure how they manage and misappropriate certain things, because once they are maybe tied to a casino, in the sense that the reservation has a casino, they're able to generate enough revenue. So I think as part of that aspect of not only understanding like life skills, but I think because of the fact that oftentimes, because even in Riverside, we do have a boarding school that specifically has Native Americans that are sent there for high school. Once they do leave, they're really positioned in a way to not really understand how to, I would say, even on a ground level, have the 21st century skills, just being able to help them sustain their livelihood, because of the fact that they're not really instructed to manage certain things appropriately. But then when that also then ties to making sure that they have an interest in being a part of the reservation, because oftentimes they tend to leave the reservation and not come back to the reservation. So there's a big push to have tribal citizens and community members actually move back to the reservation to be able to help sustain it. Many of them also benefit from working in the casinos, but oftentimes in my research, many of them do not work at the ventures, and so they don't really learn leadership skills. They don't learn those management skills that I was mentioning, but then also when you're looking even from like an emotional, like intelligence perspective, just not really being self-aware of what the implications are of actually being Indigenous. Oftentimes we say that we are Indigenous, and then you do get treated differently. You're seen differently. Most people oftentimes say, "Oh, wow, that's really neat. I've never met, an Indigenous American." And oftentimes they're like, "Oh, you don't look Native." Oftentimes there's certain things that you're not really prepared for in the world, that you, especially if you're existing, even for example, like within a boarding school, you're very limited in terms of access to certain things, so that when you do graduate and you do move forward, even when you do go to college, I felt that it kind of socially deprived me a little bit, just because people weren't really understanding why I was wearing my medallions, why I was in essence talking about spirituality, why I was really focused on my own Indigenous roots, because oftentimes people don't really talk through that. So I think just collectively, those are the three that I felt that even in the research, many of them had said that that's what's going on.
That's really interesting and fascinating, and things that I think we really need to be aware of and to like research more on, right? Yeah. So Charlotta has in the chat, she wrote, "How is the current Supreme Court case on adoption impacting the Native American community?"
Well, oftentimes, specifically, they it's unique, because we've even had multiple instances where across the nation there has been individuals that were trying to adopt, and so they were really trying to protect really their cultural sovereignty, because they don't necessarily want them to be adopted. They would rather have them be adopted by someone that's on the reservation, because it's similar to what has existed, right? Very interestingly enough, when this occurred, when they enacted all the laws to be able to have the bounties, in addition to taking children away from their homes and actually sending them to missions to work, to do a lot of the work that built the California missions, many of them had their names changed. They had their last names removed, and so a lot of the cultural identity went away. Even in my own family, just as I had mentioned, even seeing the census, and then all of a sudden wondering why did this occur. But then when I did my research, I understood that those laws actually pretty much didn't allow Native Americans to have the land that they existed on, and then they removed it. And then in order for them to be able to have that specific land, they needed a deed. So the government knew, well, they don't have the deed, so this is a way for us that created transaction that occurs under law, which is now what everything has placed itself like over the nations that were there. So when we look at this adoption, it's mainly because of the fact that they don't necessarily want this to occur again, right? a lot of the times there's foreign entities that have really kind of ruled how sovereign nations have existed and what they do. And even if you look at a reservation, that's a social confinement, that they place them there to focus them, to in essence kind of control them, but to really minimize them in a way that they are constantly even just fighting with local states and also with the federal government to be able to protect this sovereignty. So when you're looking at adoption of kids, it's mainly because they want to make sure that, yes, they potentially might have a better life, but are their indigenous roots going to be wiped out? And then slowly but surely, as children are adopted, then they leave the reservation, they don't look back, or they don't really recognize where they come from, mainly because of all of, even to Dr. Miramontes' question about the oral tradition, right? So if we have this and then you move away and get adopted, you don't really know specifically what's going to happen to those children. And so they're really trying to protect them to make sure that they're not going into the wrong hands.
So how do we support our Native American brothers and sisters and citizens who have gotten a raw deal? What are some things that we can do in the spaces where we are to support, to help, to say it's important for you, number one, to have identity, to keep your names, to keep your customs and your traditions and your language, all fine and well, but to help make it easier. I mean, reservations feel like, even though you're able to stay there, they feel like open air prisons in many cases. And so I'm just wondering what we do in the spaces where we reside and the places where we work to support your efforts.
Awesome. Thank you for that question. Oftentimes, when I worked at Coca-Cola, I really identified that there were some opportunities. And so I was a part of a team that actually created what are considered business resource groups. So we had an African-American business resource group, we had an Asian American, and then we also had a Native American business resource group all the way through the military as well. So collectively, there was a lot of groups that were there. And through that, I really wanted to experience it from a cultural perspective, but also from a corporate perspective, because of the fact that oftentimes when we're in a corporate environment, there's certain things that we can do, certain things that we cannot do. So it was really important at that time to be able to have conversations, really to activate voices that haven't been heard. And I think because we do have social media as a platform to be able to instantaneously connect, it's a good way to look at what's even on LinkedIn. For example, there's many groups such as the Native American Congress group that I'm a part of, where they provide fireside chats with other indigenous leaders that are tribal leaders that are in essence in charge of maintaining the Constitution for their nations. And so oftentimes even just participating and really just making yourself aware of really doing a little bit of research. I've done extensive research since I started my Doctor of Education, and then everyone was like, well, are you going to do another doctorate? And then I was provided an opportunity to join the Ph.D. program. And so I really felt that it kind of elevated the research, because initially my first education, well, I would say my first doctorate was on the importance of mentoring minorities. And specifically, I identified at that time that we didn't really have mentors in the workplace that really provided opportunities for minorities. And so as a result of that research, it made me really curious. And then when I was selected to be in the tribal administration program, I really started connecting the dots and really focusing on, this is a way for me to be able to have conversations, to be able to have people understand what's actually going on in the world, but really uncover the historical implications that have happened. That, in essence, there's so many different things that has created burdens for sovereign nations, specifically even just indigenous Americans. But I do think that just having open conversations, recognizing that we exist, I think that's where sometimes oftentimes people think that they just live on reservations, but they live all throughout the community. And sometimes it's important just to be able to recognize individuals for who they are. If you're curious, ask some questions in a respectful way, but also making sure that you're trying to become knowledgeable yourself, just because I think that when we don't have the conversations and we just internalize many of the things, we never really get to help ourselves become more aware of the people that are around us, specifically even within not only our jobs, but if we do even go on vacation, there's so many different factors. So for example, even just when you go to powwows, the first thing that people want to do is take pictures, right? Because they're dressed really beautiful with their regalia. But it's also important, just simplistically, when there are powwows, there's actually one that's I believe upcoming in the Southern California area, where they're free to the public. You can actually go and visit them, and you can actually participate. You can see all the vendors of what they make on the reservations. You can see their dances. You can hear their bird songs. And I think once you sit down and experience that, it was recently I went to Morongo's powwow, and it was such an experience that I will always remember it for the fact that when we had the Navajo prayer said out loud right after, as they were beginning to bring in the dancers, there was a large gust of wind that literally came, and so like everyone felt like, oh wow, we just did a Navajo prayer, and then all of a sudden the spirits came and everybody was there with us. And so I thought of my grandfather, I thought of my family, but it was really interesting to see that once that prayer ended, all this wind came in and everyone was like, oh, see, this is where we're supposed to be. And those dances really were to get away all of the negative energy, and it was just an experience. But I think to answer your question in short, is just really just participating in the experience of understanding who Indigenous Americans are, and don't let the media tell you who they are. It's really good just to even connect with people outside of that realm of TV. We can participate in different groups and really utilize networks. And so I've actually connected with so many different leaders, specifically in Indigenous nations, because of the fact that technology allows us to communicate similar to this. We were recently even speaking with Assemblyman James Ramos, who actually is not only a tribal citizen for San Manuel, but he also is the only Native American state assembly member who's really pushing for Native Americans to be able to be heard, but also to really start implementing laws, policies, and procedures, really to be able to invoke them in a way that is going to help them sustain themselves.
Thank you so much for answering that. We do have about 10 minutes left, so we have like a few more minutes left for questions and answers, but I do have a question for you. Why do you celebrate, or I guess the best question is, why is Native American Heritage Month so important, and why do you celebrate it?
So yeah, so for me, I celebrate Native American Heritage Month almost every day. So I do recognize that from the ground up. It's great that the entire month is devoted to that, just because then that allows me to be a little extra and actually start talking about the different things that we participate in. And so it allows me to also start having these working conversations. So for example, I recently had applied to the Hawaii International Conference for Education, and I was selected to actually present on building knowledge infrastructure for Indigenous nations. And so it was really interesting because for the first time, I was able to see a category of Indigenous education. And so because of that, I was like, oh, this is my opportunity to bring my research and actually go talk to several educators from around the world to be able to present the findings and really being able to do that. So I feel that it encourages me and actually makes me very proud, and recognizes my empowerment from my spiritual leaders, right? It goes all the way from my ancestral lineage all the way to my current leaders that are Native American. I currently work with many Native American leaders on a day-to-day basis. So it really kind of provides me, I would say, more of a forum for those that want to have a conversation, to be able to say that this is who I am. Even as I had mentioned earlier, I actually had this made in memoriam for my grandpa. So it's the United States flag, and then it also has a teepee and the different colors that represent everything. So as a result of, I think, just having the opportunity for this month, I really at this time really just entertain more people to be able to ask questions. Even just recently, everyone was asking questions about voting. Why is there a no on 27, and what does this actually look like? So it is kind of nice to be able to be grounded with not only my own traditional knowledge, but I think just working for Sam and Well has really catapulted me to look more into Native American history, not specifically even just to my own family, but really seeing the suffering and what they actually went through, and have an appreciation for everything. And so I even just recently, like tomorrow, for example, my wife and I are going to be going into the mountains so that I can connect with Mother Earth, and really just be able to take off my shoes and be able to just walk and connect with the earth, and just find a stream to be able to cleanse myself. So it's a good way for me to say, okay, this entire month I'm going to make sure that I'm not only recognizing who I am, but also informing others. And I think through my research, everyone was really interested to see what this research is going to tell. And from what I'm assessing is that everyone is really excited to have knowledge infrastructure built across several nations, because it's a way for them to be able to take protective measures to ensure that their political sovereignty is protected. But it also goes down to this idea of cultural sovereignty, where they specifically have an identity that might be wiped away if certain laws are enacted, or if certain things are assessed in a way that many of the tribal nations, if once they don't have enough resources, they might die out just because of the fact that there's only a small little amount of tribal citizens. So I try to figure out what I can do. So even recently, even just applying to see what I can do to help Indigenous students, really just trying to connect with them in a way that I can help paint a picture to say that I have similar backgrounds, grew up in poverty, and my journey took me on different turns that I wasn't expecting. And then as a result of everything, I realized that everything was all grounded within my Indigenous roots, and that's what really made me strong to make the decisions that I did, and really just helped me inform who I came to be, who I'm supposed to be, and then identify that in a way that I can look to Indigenous youth to say that we can empower one another. You just have to take the steps to be able to get to the next journey. So yes.
Nice, I love it. And Sasheen, can you actually pronounce that word? That's a Sadia. Is that how you pronounce
Yeah,
it?
but dia. It
Oh.
means thank you in my language, but more so it actually like translates better. It means like your whole being feels happy.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I know we're coming to the end here. I do have one last question for you, and you've touched on this. So without putting you on the spot or asking you to go into your own personal journey, can you speak a little bit to the relationship of spirituality? You've talked about it a little bit, and how it's embodied within tribal community, if you will.
Yes. I think as I look back, even just growing up, my grandfather took us on many trips to prepare us for our own spiritual journey. I think that he was able to show me certain things, and even just smudging, my house after certain things might not necessarily go a certain way. Even just recently, I had mentioned earlier that I was diagnosed with a rare cancer in August. And as a result of that, it shifted the dynamic of everything of how I looked at life. And so I was able to remove the rare cancer, so I'm cancer free from that. But it really shifted how I think of what I do every day. And it's allowed me to really be more grounded in knowing that there is a greater being that is there, because of the fact of me being able to find it as early as I did, and it not only didn't not metastasize, it was removed from that. So as a part of that, I connected with my other spiritual friends that we, as I mentioned, we went over to Laverne and we did a prayer ceremony. But I think just taking daily actions to be able to inform myself of what I've learned, and to make sure that I'm continuing on my grandfather's legacy. So one of the main things that I've really been pushing for is to not only show my kids eventually when we have them, but also making sure that I'm impacting everything outside of my family. And then I also utilized spirituality to be able to make decisions, just because of the fact that oftentimes when we get emotional, we want to respond in a certain way, but then I have certain spiritual techniques that allow me to be able to calm down, to be able to refocus my thoughts, and then also really have me understand things from a holistic perspective. And really, just if anything, it's at the end of the day, it's allowing me to look at everything in my surroundings and appreciate, whether it be all the leaves on the floor that I'm going to have to pick up because it's fall now, but it's also because of the fact that these are the items that are provided to us by our greater being, depending on whatever your greater being might be.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So it is 6:29. I just put in the chat the link to sign up for our other 3 events that we have coming up. I want to say thank you so much, Dr. Vigil, for coming on today and for sharing your story with us, and really giving us so much inspiration and answering questions from all of us. I think we all had some really great questions, and I believe we learned quite a bit today. And I just want to say thank you once again for kicking us off with the Native American Heritage Month with your fireside chat. Once again, everybody, thank you so much for coming to our first of 4 speaker events that we have. We do have 3 more events coming up. Please sign up for our upcoming sessions with Sasheen Raymond, Dr. Tatiana Santiago, and Dr. Liahi Hall. Sasheen will be coming up on Wednesday, November 16. Dr. Tatiana is on Friday, November 18, 5:30 p.m. Pacific for all of you who are wondering if it's the same time. It's going to be the same time for all of our sessions. And Dr. Liahi Hall will be on Wednesday, November 23rd. We look forward to having you. The link is in the chat. Sign up, and we hope to see you again next week. Thank you so much.